On May 2nd, 1949, inside the cold granite walls of Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, 3 men vanished into history. Their names never made headlines. Their escape was buried, their fate erased from official reports. But decades later, fragments of truth began to surface: letters, guard notes, and an unfiled maintenance log, all pointing to one forgotten night when Samuel Reed, Javier Morales, and Henry Wilkinson did the impossible. They broke out of the rock. Alcatraz wasn't just a prison, it was a machine built for despair. Rising from the black waters of San Francisco Bay, its walls stood 30 feet high, its fences charged, its guards armed with rifles. The water surrounding the island was near freezing year-round, the current swift enough to drag a man under within minutes. Between 1934 and 1963, more than 1,000 inmates passed through those gates. Officially, no one ever escaped alive. But there were always whispers. Reed, Morales, and Wilkinson arrived at Alcatraz separately between 1946 and 1948. None of them were famous criminals. Reed had robbed banks in the Midwest. He was clever, but quiet. The kind of man who watched everything and spoke little. Morales, younger, had been caught during a botched armored car heist in Texas. He was hot-blooded, impulsive, but brave. Wilkinson was different altogether, a former civil engineer from Seattle convicted of embezzlement after a business collapse. Together, they formed an unlikely alliance: brains, brawn, and precision. By early 1948, all 3 had been assigned to prison work. Details: Reed in the laundry, Morales in the kitchen, Wilkinson in maintenance. Work duty meant movement, access. A chance to study the rhythms of the prison. When guards changed posts, when lights dimmed, which doors stayed locked and which ones didn't quite close right. Reed was the first to notice the pattern: the 5-minute blind spots between guard patrols in the West Utility Corridor. That corridor ran behind Cell Block B, a narrow maintenance tunnel used for wiring and hot water pipes. Few guards entered it anymore. Wilkinson, with his engineering background, took interest. He understood the original blueprints from the 1932nd's construction, where walls were thick, where air vents led, how the structure breathed. Their plan didn't start with a map or a blueprint. It began with a crack. One night in October 1948, Reed, sweeping the laundry room floor, brushed his hand along a hairline fracture in the plaster near a disused maintenance panel. When he pressed, it flexed slightly hollow behind it. He told Wilkinson the next morning during yard time. The engineer confirmed what he suspected. That wall bordered an abandoned ventilation duct once used to heat the western block before upgrades in '42. If they could open it, they'd find a crawl space large enough for a man. Beyond that, the old conduit tunnels ran close to the island's outer utility door, sealed but not demolished. Wilkinson began sketching in his mind. The prison's maintenance schedule became their playbook. Every Saturday afternoon, routine checks meant spare materials lying around: wrenches, bolts, insulation panels. Morales, bold and quick-handed, smuggled small items during kitchen runs: tinfoil, grease, a small paring knife that he later reshaped into a scraper. Reed handled timing. Wilkinson handled design. Their first goal was access open the wall without alerting sound or dust. Wilkinson instructed them to wait until nights when fog rolled thick from the bay. Fog muffled everything: footsteps, whispers, even the faint chipping of plaster. Over weeks, they worked in shifts of seconds, scraping at mortar seams no wider than a fingernail. Every flake went into hidden pockets or mixed with laundry lint, disposed of unnoticed. By December 1948, they had carved a small aperture behind the laundry wall, just enough to slip an arm through. Behind it, the forgotten heating duct. Wilkinson slid a mirror inside, catching the dim reflection of old metal piping stretching into darkness. That was the moment the dream turned into a plan. They began collecting the impossible. From the kitchen, Morales stole wax paper and rubber tubing pieces of old hose used for dishwashing. Reed smuggled thin wires from damaged laundry presses. Wilkinson requisitioned repair materials from supply closets, small metal rods, washers, and screws that went unaccounted for. None of these meant anything alone, but together they could fashion tools, a light, even a breathing hose. They met quietly during laundry shifts, communicating through coded talk about loads and wash cycles. When guards approached, Reed would whistle a tune, their signal to scatter. Every detail of the escape was mapped in minds, never on paper. They couldn't risk a single note being found. What made their plan so different was patience. Other inmates dreamed loudly, boasted about escaping. Reed's trio didn't. They worked for 7 months, inch by inch, in silence. By February 1949, their tunnel extended nearly 6 feet behind the wall, leading into the narrow conduit space. Wilkinson reinforced the walls using stolen bed springs and twisted wire, creating a crude frame to prevent collapse. They installed makeshift ventilation using hollowed tubing, hidden behind laundry carts, connecting to the room's existing exhaust fans. It was meticulous, mechanical, brilliant. But there was a problem: light. Working in darkness risked noise. Bringing in lamps risked detection. Wilkinson solved it with ingenuity. He used the reflective inner foil of cigarette packs traded in the yard to line the tunnel edges, bouncing what little light came from a stolen flashlight battery hidden in a sock. At night, when the guards' rounds thinned, they worked like miners in the bowels of the rock, carving freedom one brick at a time. The decision to escape on May 2nd, 1949 wasn't random. Wilkinson discovered that on the first Monday of every month, the island's power grid briefly shut down for maintenance between 9:30 and 10 p.m. During that half hour, certain lights dimmed and outer patrols slowed. The perfect cover. They spent April preparing everything they'd need for the water crossing. Morales, from the kitchen, collected empty rubber gloves, sealing them with melted wax to create small buoyant bladders. Reed filled them with air and tied them together to make crude flotation bags. Wilkinson assembled a small compass using a sewing needle, magnetized on a prison radio speaker, and floated on water inside a bottle cap. It wasn't elegant, but it would point north. The final week was tense. One wrong move, one noise too loud, and they'd vanish into solitary confinement forever. Yet nothing in their demeanor changed. Reed kept folding sheets. Morales kept serving soup. Wilkinson kept fixing light fixtures. Then came the night. At 9:42 p.m., the lights flickered. The hum of the island dimmed. Reed gave a nod. Morales slipped from the kitchen hall carrying a laundry basket, their signal prop. Inside, beneath towels, were 3 small pouches: food, a flashlight, and the compass. Wilkinson waited by the maintenance corridor, tools tucked into his belt. They moved fast and silent. Reed entered the laundry room, closing the door behind him. From the far wall, he pried off the plaster panel they'd reattached with soap paste. Behind it yawned the narrow black mouth of the tunnel. Wilkinson slid in first, his shoulders scraping metal. The air was hot and stale. Morales followed, then Reed, sealing the wall from inside. In that moment, the 3 men disappeared from Alcatraz. The crawl space was suffocating. Pipes groaned above their heads, condensation dripping on their backs. They inched forward on elbows, dragging their gear. After 15 minutes, they reached a fork. One path led upward toward the roof vent, the other down toward the western perimeter utility door. They'd chosen the latter. The utility door was supposed to be sealed with rivets and a welded latch, closed years earlier after renovations. Wilkinson had studied it through cracks for months and believed the weld was shallow. He was right. With a file and sheer force, they cut through the rusted seam in under 20 minutes. The door creaked a sound like thunder in the confined space, but no alarms followed. Beyond lay a narrow service yard, shielded from main view by retaining walls. From here, a set of iron stairs led down to a lower dock, used only for maintenance barges. The fog was dense, rolling off the bay like breath. They climbed down slowly. The guards' footsteps echoed faintly above, but unseen. When they reached the dock, They crouched behind barrels, listening. The island was alive with silent waves slapping rock, gulls crying somewhere unseen. Wilkinson pointed to the waterline. There, moored loosely, was a flat-bottomed utility barge, chained and locked but neglected. Over the months they had loosened its bolts during laundry transport days, pretending to work nearby. Tonight, that preparation paid off. Morales produced the file again and snapped the weakened chain. The barge shifted slightly with the tide. They climbed aboard. Using a plank as leverage, they pushed it free, letting the current drift them from the dock before starting the small auxiliary motor, disabled long ago, but recently repaired by Wilkinson under the guise of maintenance checks. It sputtered, caught, and came alive, a whispering hum beneath the fog. They headed northeast, toward the faint outline of the mainland invisible undercloud. The bay was merciless. Water temperature hovered near 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 degrees Celsius. Fog blinded them beyond a few yards. Currents swirled unpredictably. Reed manned the rudder. Morales bailed water with a tin cup. Wilkinson read the compass, guiding by instinct more than sight. The motor choked twice, but held. Halfway across, the fog thickened into a wall. They cut the motor to avoid sound and paddled instead, using stolen oar handles lashed from mopheads. Each stroke was agony. The cold bit through clothing. Hands cramped. Lips bled. The silence between them was heavy. The unspoken knowledge that one mistake could mean drowning, capture, or worse. At 11:05 p.m., a beam of searchlight swept across the bay from the island's watchtower. The three froze. The light passed overhead, diffused by fog, then vanished. They resumed, slower, quieter. By 11:40, they neared the coastline west of Crissy Field. Waves grew shallower. Morales jumped first, dragging the barge close enough to beach. The three men stumbled into sand, collapsing from exhaustion. They made it. No sirens, no guards, just the soft hiss of fog and the faint lights of San Francisco glowing through the mist. They hid the barge under driftwood, covering it with seaweed. Reed checked the compass and pointed north toward the wooded slopes leading inland. Their plan was simple. Reach a safe house in Marin County arranged months prior through a contact known only as Clark, a caretaker sympathetic to ex-cons. Moving through fog and darkness, they stayed low, skirting fences and back roads. Morales limped, his feet blistered raw. Wilkinson, soaked and shaking, navigated by memory of coastlines he'd studied through repair windows. By dawn, they reached the edge of a small farm near Sausalito. There, inside a weathered barn, they collapsed behind hay bales, hearts still pounding. When the sun rose, the island erupted. At 7:15 a.m., guards discovered the missing men during head count. Panic rippled through the administration. Boats were dispatched, search teams mobilized. Within hours, the Coast Guard combed the bay, but fog and tides erased all trace. Officials found fragments of broken oar, a scrap of rubber tubing, and declared the men drowned. Yet even as headlines screamed 3 dead in Alcatraz escape attempt, the truth slept under that barn roof. For the next 24 hours they lay silent, eating scraps of stolen bread, drying clothes over a lantern. That night, Clark arrived a wiry man in his 50s, with a pickup truck, and no questions. He brought them dry clothes, canned food, and false identification papers. For the outside world, they were fishermen returning home. By May 4th, they left Sausalito, traveling north through back roads, avoiding cities. They rode in the covered bed of Clark's truck past Petaluma, Santa Rosa, and into the dense woods of Mendocino County where a small hunting cabin awaited. There, hidden among redwoods and silence, the trio vanished again. Weeks passed. Newspapers lost interest. Officially, the men were presumed dead. Bodies never recovered. Case closed. But in the solitude of the cabin, they planned their next moves. Wilkinson dreamed of slipping south to Mexico. Morales wanted to reach relatives in Texas under a new name. Reed simply wanted anonymity. By June 1949, Clark arranged new documents, forged military discharge papers and work permits. They changed appearances, shaved, dyed hair, adopted new clothes. Reed became Thomas Blake, a warehouse worker. Morales, Javier Duarte, a laborer. Wilkinson took the alias Henry Wilson, civil consultant. On July 10th, a storm gave them cover. They split. Morales left first, hitching a freight train toward Los Angeles. Wilkinson departed 2 days later, heading east. Reed remained briefly, helping Clark patch the roof before disappearing himself by the month's end. No one saw them again. For years, the legend whispered among former guards, 3 men who outsmarted the Rock. But there was no proof, only rumors. A postcard from Mexico bearing no return address. A photograph found in a Texas diner showing a man resembling Morales. A death certificate in Guadalajara for a Henry Wilson, engineer, born 1913. Decades later, a retired Alcatraz guard named Richard Collins spoke to a journalist. He recalled maintenance crews patching a strange hole behind a laundry wall in 1950. The plaster had been replaced hastily, as if covering something embarrassing. Collins believed it was the Reed escape route, sealed forever. In 2007, a historian digging through Bureau of Prisons archives found an unfiled repair request dated the 7th of May, 1949. Reinforced West Wing ventilation corridor. Evidence of structural tampering. It was stamped, but unsigned. Then, in 2012, a private collector purchased a bundle of old letters at an estate sale in San Diego. Among them were 3 envelopes addressed to E. Reed. Inside, faded ink described warm weather south of the border, good health, and a mention of Hank's workshop. They were postmarked 1951, Mexico City. If authentic, they meant one thing. The 1949 escape succeeded. Unlike the later 1962 attempt by Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, this one never entered the record books because no bodies, no evidence, no witnesses ever emerged. The Bureau had every reason to bury it. A successful escape would shatter Alcatraz's myth of inescapability. Declaring the men dead preserved the illusion. Today, over 75 years later, the Rock still stands a tourist monument of stone and silence. Visitors walk the same corridors where Reed, Morales, and Wilkinson once plotted in whispers. They see the cells, the tools, the impossibility of escape. But behind one wall in the old laundry, a faint outline remains, a patch of plaster, slightly lighter than the rest, covering the mouth of a forgotten tunnel. It's said that if you press your ear to that wall on a foggy night, you can still hear the echo of scraping metal, the faint rhythm of men chiseling through stone toward freedom. What makes this story powerful isn't just the daring, it's the precision, the patience, the quiet brilliance of 3 ordinary men who used observation, engineering, and nerve to defeat the world's most secure prison. No Hollywood theatrics, no gunfights or explosions, just planning, grit, and timing. Their escape reminds us that even in the heart of stone, cracks exist, and sometimes, through those cracks, freedom finds a way.